For 17 years, serves as the St. Louis Champions Organizer at Missouri Jobs with Justice. She has a Bachelor's of Arts from Yale University, a Master's in Public Policy from the University of Chicago, a Master's of Divinity with the General Theological Seminary, and a Doctor of Ministry from Eden Theological Seminary. Before joining the Missouri Jobs with Justice staff, she served on both the St. Louis Leadership Team and the St. Louis Workers' Rights Board for more than 10 years, and was the founding co-chair of the St. Louis Faith Labor Alliance. She and her husband, Jonathan, are raising 3 young children in the city. Please welcome Dr. Danieley.
Thank you. So it looks like I have some familiar faces, Bill and Morton and Jill, probably other folks that I'm either not seeing or, you know, how Zoom is. But the way I got here this morning is that Dee Myers is a very, very long time dear friend of my godmother, Marcia, who was a public school teacher in Normandy for 30 years, where I grew up. And Marcia passed away in November, and it was, I think, through reconnecting through Marcia that I got invited here. So I'm not sure if Dee is online this morning, but you can thank her for this connection. Also, when I was a kid, my best friend, who's still my best friend, was raised at the Ethical Society in Ladue. So, you know, if we were doing a sleepover at my house, we'd go to the Episcopal Church in Northwoods. And if we were doing a sleepover at her house, we go to the Ethical Society. So I appreciate being here this morning. As Jeff said, I've been involved with Missouri Jobs with Justice for, I've been, I guess, 15 years. I was a parish priest for 12 years from 2004 to 2016 at St. John's Episcopal Church in Tower Grove. And throughout that time, I was involved with Missouri Jobs with Justice. Of course, it started, probably Bill remembers, as St. Louis Jobs with Justice. And then we expanded to Kansas City and Springfield and Columbia. And during normal times, we have a bi-monthly breakfast meeting in St. Charles. So hopefully when all this is over, you all are invited to attend the Faith Labor Alliance breakfast, Tri-County Faith Labor Alliance breakfast. We also have them monthly in downtown St. Louis, as well as in other parts of the state. But those are a way to build relationships. Transfiguration is a great church. I think they were the first church in our diocese to have an openly gay priest. Jason, which I think was quite a risk at the time for Lake St. Louis. So they're a really wonderful congregation in Lake St. Louis. My priest growing up, Charlie Morris, retired. When he retired, he was also a member of Transfiguration. So lots of connections. What I'm going to do this morning, and as I said, I think Bill saw this when I gave a presentation to another group. I'm going to show you a video that shows some of our people from around the state. I'm going to share some basic information about how Missouri Jobs with Justice works. I'm going to share some links in the chat, and then I am happy to engage in conversation. So this is not terribly formal, and I'm just happy to be with you here this morning. So I'm going to try to screen share now. We'll hope it works like it did before. Oh, come on. Yep. Okay. So of course I can't see the file right now. So I'm just going to go off screen for a second and I'll get this set up. All right. Screen. Jeez. It all works till you're doing it, you know. Okay. So here is a picture from one of our St. Louis Faith Labor Alliance breakfast. I think that was almost right before before everything shut down. So lots of happy people after a good breakfast. And I'm going to show you a video now that we compiled in the fall, especially celebrating Medicaid expansion and celebrating the my daughter just brought me breakfast and celebrating our expansion to Columbia. Come on. Hang on one second. My 4-year-old just asked me something. Yes, Teddy, I can be yours, but right now I need to talk to some folks. Thank you. So as you can see from those videos, and you could probably tell which ones were more recent in the last few months, We have continued to work for an economy and a democracy that works for everyone, despite the pandemic. And in fact, because of it, because so many workers have been suffering this year, grocery workers, postal workers, healthcare workers, and teachers, obviously, but especially a lot of low-wage workers, nursing home workers. There have been so many people that haven't had the protections they've needed during this time. So I'm going to go through some of the structure of Jobs with Justice. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat right now. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to ignore the chat for right now, and then we'll talk at the end. So our mission is to organize Missourians to build transformative power for social, racial, and economic justice in our state. We believe that strong relationships rooted in justice, equity, and solidarity are necessary to build the transformative power for social, racial, and economic justice. This is our vision for Missouri: an economy and public infrastructure that is strong and where good jobs are plentiful, where the right of all workers to organize and collectively bargain is protected, where opportunities exist for all regardless of race, identity, or immigration status, where all are assured of economic security and a safe, healthy life from the cradle to the grave. As many of you know, a lot of our legislators care about people up until the moment they're born and then seem to not care. Something that is really become much more central to our work is that white supremacy must be understood and challenged and dismantled in order to accomplish our goals. And we are also part of two national networks, both the National Jobs with Justice Network and the National People's Action Network. And we sometimes participate in coordinated activities, such as right now. Here's the volunteer opportunity for you. Every Tuesday, throughout February and March, People's Action has given us the capacity to do patch-through calls about COVID relief. And not only are local volunteers making these calls to legislators and Congress calling for $2,000 checks per month, but people around the country from People's Action Network are joining us in these phone banks. So that's something that just started last week, and we're calling every Tuesday from 5 to 8 p.m. In general, there are two kinds of work: local solidarity work, which is really a lot of the, especially during COVID demonstrations that you saw are, and state and local policy work. So what that means is, and this is really how I remember starting in St. Louis, Jobs with Justice. Let's say that a place that already has a union contract is undergoing negotiation for a new contract, and the owners want to subcontract a bunch of union jobs. That would be an opportunity both for direct action in terms of protests or rallies, and it would also be a place where another body that I staff, the Workers' Rights Board, might write letters or try to send a delegation when it's not COVID to meet with the owners. The same kind of tactics might be, we would write op-eds or letters to the editor. The same kind of tactics are used when a group of workers is in the midst of trying to organize a union, such as in December, we had a Scrooge action, which you can look up on the Labor Tribune. They took some great pictures. We had a Scrooge action at MERS Goodwill for refusing to recognize the union organizing of workers in their Festus facility. And so that organizing did result in at least the union not being decertified, which means that there's still a shot, and especially hopefully a better shot under the new federal administration, for those workers to get a contract with MERS Goodwill. I think you also saw pictures from demonstrations in front of the VA facilities this year, because there's both a lot of traceable systematic racism that workers of the VA are facing. And then, of course, they are facing the incredible added challenges during COVID. You saw workers this summer, despite COVID, workers and community in Columbia and mid-Missouri organized to save 300 union jobs at Mizzou. A lot of the groundskeeping staff and food service staff were going to be laid off and subcontracted at a time when people are really suffering incredibly. And here are these workers continuing to go to work, risking their health, and they were about to lose their jobs. And despite COVID, we had a protest, we had a lot of organizing, and were successful in keeping those jobs. Coming up on this Tuesday, February 16th, we're continuing to support the work as we have since the very beginning. I guess I always think of these things and how old my kids are. So I guess for about the last 8 years, Fight for 15 has been going on nationally. And when that started, when the idea of fast food workers organizing and a $15 minimum wage, when we started, people thought that was nutty. And now we probably need to increase it to $20. There's evidence from the Episcopal, I wish, from the Economic Policy Institute that even in Missouri by 2025, a person with children will need to make at least $20 an hour to get by in rural Missouri. And so this Tuesday, we're having another Caravan Protest at the McDonald's on Lindell in the city of St. Louis as part of a national day of action, trying to make sure that Biden's campaign promise of $15 an hour as the federal minimum wage comes into fruition. And also because workers at McDonald's continue to want to be recognized as a union, and McDonald's has used all kinds of legal tactics, especially with regard to their franchise structure, to prevent those workers from being recognized. So even if we get 15 an hour federal minimum wage, the fight for fast food workers to get respect on their job and be able to have more control over the conditions of their labor, and especially we've had a lot of protests this year around their demands for hazard pay, for paid sick leave, for adequate PPE. And also a lot of fast food workers, if they're involved in organizing, often have their hours cut. And so they don't have stable income. They don't have a stable schedule or income, which especially I know as a parent of 3 children during this pandemic, if you don't know what your schedule is going to be, especially right now with virtual schooling, it's just makes life impossible. So those are some examples of things that we're doing even with the pandemic. In terms of state policy, well, it's Missouri. And so over the last few years, we really have had to build up our organizational and our collaborative power to pass things through the ballot initiative process, which is very, very difficult. But when the legislature doesn't act, the people have to. And so in recent years, we assisted, especially with educating faith and community groups about how right to work would have hurt all workers and hurt our infrastructure in the state. And so fortunately, Prop A was defeated overwhelmingly. 67% of voters defeated that in 2018 in August, and we had a small, a part to play in that. We had a much bigger role in terms of getting Prop B passed in 2018 that increased the minimum wage in Missouri, and that was because in 2015 we advocated and organized in St. Louis and Kansas City to raise the wage in each of those cities, and the legislature said, no, you can't do that. You have to do it statewide. And then of course we did it, and the majority of the legislature didn't like that we did that. But it passed by 62% of the vote in the fall of 2018. And of course, we passed Amendment 1 in the fall of 2018, which would have introduced a nonpartisan demographer and helped eliminate gerrymandering and helped eliminate lobbyist gifts. And unfortunately, the legislature last spring passed legislation that became Amendment 3, which was very deceptive. And despite our court challenges to the language, Amendment 3 passed by 2 points in the fall of this last fall. And so now we're trying to make sure that we get the best redistricting commissions possible and that total population is counted, because that's a big strategy of people who want more. So the white population in Missouri and across the country is getting older and smaller, right? And the rising American electorate of people of every other ethnic identity and younger people is getting bigger. So a way to suppress people's power is to not count total population, to only count what's called CVAP, to only count citizens and voting age population. And so that is a possibility now that Amendment 3 has passed, and it's something that we must fight with everything in our being, because we would be the first state, and I always hate it when Missouri is first in something or number one in something. We would be the first state not to count total population since at least Reconstruction. And that would be would open the door to a lot of other states having that. That was a lot. Maybe I'll stop here both so I can take a drink of water and to see if there's any questions about things that I just talked about.
Could you elaborate just a little bit on the volunteer opportunity Tuesday night phone calling?
Yes. So the way that we've done phone banks throughout COVID is people phone bank from their homes. I know this is not, believe me, this is most of my job this year. It is not super exciting to be by yourself. You need to have both, as we are right now, a computer that has internet as well as a phone. You need both of those things to be able to participate in a virtual phone bank. There's training at 5 p.m. and then we make calls for about 2 hours and then we debrief. And the goal of these what are called deep canvassing conversations is really to listen to how other people in Missouri are doing and to try to have relational conversations even over the phone, and then to try to move them into action by calling their Congress people to demand COVID relief. So last week we tested this out and I had some really great conversations with people. It was a really good script. We worked out some of the technical bugs. I can also share the sign up sheet as a Google form in the chat once I'm done presenting here. But basically with every phone bank, there's a training. Everyone, introduces themselves, and then you make calls usually for about 2 hours. And of course you can take a break whenever you need it. And then there's a debrief at the end. And we'll be doing that for at least the next 4 weeks, possibly the next 6 weeks, as we try to move federal COVID relief.
Thank you.
Are there other questions right now or comments? All right, I'll keep going then. So how do we do all these things? How do all those people who you saw in the video, how do they gather? How do we do this? Well, the basic organizing principle of Missouri Jobs with Justice is the Be There Pledge. And this is what really caught my attention even 17 years ago when I first moved to St. Louis, was that it seemed very doable to me. And it seemed elastic, meaning that it wasn't an organizing model I've often seen, especially in faith communities, that requires you to agree on everything in order to do anything. This pledge is not like that. So The basic Be There pledge is I will be there to fight for an economy, a democracy, and a Missouri that works for all of us, regardless of the color of our skin, our zip code, or what's in our wallets. I commit to be there at least 5 times a year, standing up for our rights as working people, Black, brown, and white, to good jobs and communities, supporting the rights of all workers to organize and bargain collectively, fighting for fair wages in the face of corporate greed, fighting against white supremacy wherever I encounter it, and standing up for racial justice, organizing the unorganized to take aggressive action to secure a better future for all of us, mobilizing those already organized to join the fight for jobs with justice and pay dues of no less than $5 a month. So what this Be There pledge allows us to do is to build collective power. Now, this is the individual Be There pledge. We also have organizational memberships, and that, for example, the Mid-Rivers Ethical Society, could join. The lowest fee is $50 for very small nonprofits. $100 is like the next level, but I doubt it would be more than that if the whole ethical society wanted to join on. Certainly for my congregation, I don't think dues were ever more than $100, even when we grew quite a bit. Now, some unions and some larger organizations pay quite a bit more. But what that allows us to do is have, when we have individual members and we have organizational members, it allows us a lot more flexibility than if all of our funding were from foundations, say. Because what it means is we're accountable to the members, both the organizational members and the individual members, in terms of what we prioritize and what we commit to as a coalition. So right now, statewide, Missouri Jobs with Justice is a coalition that includes about 150 groups, as well as thousands of individual members. And that gives us a lot of potential for organizing, because again, you don't have to agree on everything in order to do something, right? There are often times where, for example, unions disagree with each other about policy. We saw that recently with the desire on the part of some unions to privatize the St. Louis airport, while others were leading the fight against it. So you don't have to be one coherent, huge group in order to be there for other people. And I have found this just to be a really flexible and really powerful organizing model, both when I was a volunteer and when I was on the leadership team, and now that I'm on staff. This action was an example of a very powerful action we did almost exactly a year ago. There's me about to get arrested. There's my colleague John about to get arrested. There's my colleague Jennifer about to get arrested. Rabbi Susan Talvey, who you may know. Reverend Chrissy Avis Roos, who's a United Church of Christ pastor in the city. Reverend Daryl Gray, who's a civil rights leader and missionary Baptist pastor. Minister Tori Jameson, the head of Lot's Wife. So, and here's workers from SEIUE. So SEIU, Local 1. So last year, the contract for 2,000 janitors was up in the region of St. Louis. And we spent many months doing lobby actions where we would go into lobbies and march around for about 5 minutes and then leave before we got in trouble. We did letters to the editor. We did teach-ins. We had a really amazing teach-in with someone who was a sanitation worker at the strike, with Dr. King, of course, right before he was assassinated during the Memphis sanitation workers strike. And it was all to build up to this day of action last January 27th, where I think 20 people, including myself, got arrested. And the huge that huge rally and the civil disobedience And all of the building up to that we had done led to a very strong contract being settled within I think a week last year for workers. And so that was a really powerful action. And it's something I think about often because we haven't been able to do anything like that safely this year. So that kind of remembering the power of that action sort of keeps me going. And also I keep getting notices for court because that's not settled yet. So I keep being reminded that I got arrested last year. As I mentioned briefly, and I'll elaborate here, Missouri Jobs with Justice is now part of a coalition that we've helped build statewide called the Missouri Voter Engagement Collaborative. And this really started, there's been different iterations of it, but the most recent collaboration between grassroots groups started, I believe, around our beginning the organizing for Prop B and Amendment 1 in probably 2016, 2017. And we realized that in order to accomplish the kind of power that we want in Missouri, and this is a coalition that goes from the Missouri Rural Crisis Center to Organization for Black Struggle, goes from all parts of the state, that we really needed to do internal work, both individually and organizationally, around the things that divide us, which is usually rooted in white supremacy, usually the idea that there are wealthy white people, and we're not talking like, we're talking about like the 1%, right? Who throughout history, throughout the last, 500 years or so, particularly, have used racism in particular to divide working people from one another and to break up efforts to organize. In our orientation training that we give to the Missouri Movement Project, for example, we talk about in the 1920s, during the Great Depression, there was the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in the Boot Heel in Missouri, and it was comprised of white and Black tenant farmers. And they organized because they were suffering horribly. And they even got federal attention because they basically occupied the main highway going through the Boot Heel. And that movement was broken up by sheriffs and by other members of the KKK that separated the white tenant farmers from the Black tenant farmers and who used violence. And that movement disintegrated because of, much more powerful white people splitting up the Black and the white tenant farmers. And so that's just one example from Missouri history. So a couple of years ago, we started having these very long, very intense meetings together. And this is the multiracial purpose statement that we collectively came up with. We are a collaboration of grassroots organizations that believe in the innate dignity, worth, and power of all people. We work to support the leadership of historically oppressed people and oppose dehumanizing narratives of white supremacy and domination. We work together on issues of education, economics, criminal justice, health, labor, and political engagement. We are dedicated to creating a new narrative of mutual thriving and modeling the just world we want to create, both within and without our organizations, and between, excuse me. And I feel like this is very important to me. For example, as a Christian, I hope that most of what I try to do in my life is based on my baptismal covenant, right? And so the same thing, if we aren't working within our own organizations as individuals and as organizations and as a collective on making sure that our values accord with our actions and how we're treating each other, then we are much less likely to be successful. And if we are successful, it's much less likely to be long lasting. We have the danger, like with the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, of being pulled apart from each other, of being made to have a scarcity mentality, to being pitted against one another for grants, for example, or for membership, rather than collaborating and working together. And so this has been very transformative work. I'll say for me personally, it has been, but also for our organizations and for the strength of our working together. And now I want to give you a happy example of how all of this came together. So some of those pictures you saw from Medicaid expansion were quite old. I have pictures of myself with my oldest child, who's now 10, in Jefferson City advocating for Medicaid expansion when she was an infant. Well, after 10 years of organizing, Missouri Voter Engagement Collaborative got Medicaid, collected enough signatures to get Medicaid expansion on the ballot. We literally, there was primary the week before Missouri really shut down, or some parts of Missouri shut down because of COVID. And we collected signatures that day throughout the state, thank God, or whoever you want to thank. That was our last day collecting signatures. And because we collected on that primary, we got enough signatures to get Medicaid expansion on the ballot. And because of that, even though all of our MOVE phone banks and text banks were virtual over the summer, we were able to pass Medicaid expansion. And now the fight in the legislature around that is really to make sure that it's fully funded and that there's the infrastructure within state government to make sure that people can access the benefits that they are entitled to. So you can see that while we were part of a larger whole, initially our goal within the Missouri Jobs with Justice Coalition was about half of the statewide goal. And we exceeded our goal, and the MOVE Coalition exceeded our goal. So that was a really powerful, powerful thing. And you see here people collecting signatures throughout the state. Here is the link, and I'm going to put a bunch of links of things I mentioned in the chat. Here's the link again for Jobs with Justice, for membership, and the pledge. I'm going to let you read it while I get some water and while I put some other links in the chat. And then I will go to the last slide and then take questions. Okay, so I can't do all those things at the same time. So let me finish with the slides and then I'll do it. Again, here are some pictures. We've got, I think this was probably me and Natasha Pickens, the president of CWA 6355 of state workers. And we were probably at the Jefferson Bank commemoration protest. This is an action calling on pharmaceutical price relief. These are organizers collecting signatures in Springfield, Missouri. And I believe this is a picture from one of our MOVE collaborative anti-racism gatherings in Columbia last year. So now I'll stop this screen share. I'll share some links in the chat and then we can take questions or have conversation. There's that. Oh, this is a fun fundraiser. It might be more fun in your districts than it is in mine. Through today, we are sending Valentines to our state legislators around healthcare and working conditions. So, like I know that my legislators are supportive of these issues. It might be fun to send some to yours. And then here is the link for membership for the Valentines. For the webinar we have coming up around a full legislative update, because right now the Missouri legislature's like a fire hose. They're just spraying us with legislation. There's at least 11 bills right now around limiting freedom of expression in Missouri. There's a ton of bills around limiting the ballot initiative process, which as I think you can see from my slides, is incredibly difficult already for grassroots people. As we saw with Amendment 3, the legislature can put whatever they want on the ballot with a simple majority, but it is already really expensive and really labor intensive for people to get things on the ballot. There's a slew of horrible bills around privatizing of education, sponsored by Eigel. So there's just right now, there's just a bunch of things that we are dealing with in the state legislature. So I encourage you to join our webinar on the 24th at 2 p.m. for an update on that and what you can do. And then, as I mentioned, also there's I'll find the Google form that has all of the phone bank times, as well as the time for the caravan this coming Tuesday. And thank you for listening to all of that.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Dr. Danieley?
Hey, instead of a question, I just want to offer my experience, I guess, with Jobs with Justice. I sort of got started in this when I retired about 14 years ago. And what I found so, I guess, engaging or so cool about it is that they would hold actions. And that's all you had to do back then, was sign a thing saying you'll show up. It was a show up thing. And I mean, I forget what it was. I've held protest signs in front of T-Mobile or all kinds of places, but it was cool because you could just show up and everybody was just sort of there. There was sort of leadership, but I learned a chance. It was just a way to meet people who were very like-minded, and it was really, for me, encouraging after my retirement, and it allowed me to really broaden my exposure to a lot of really good folks. One winter, I actually got hired. I wanted to volunteer, but they had a grant or something, so they wanted to pay me. And I was a petition blocker. Okay, and for those that know me, might understand where my personality would fit into this, because my job was to go up to people that were collecting, and I don't even remember what the petition was anymore.
Oh, I remember that. It was this guy. It was like it was called a civil rights initiative, but it would have limited. Yeah, and the campaign for it had paid people from all over the country.
Right.
I did this too. That was fun. Go for it.
Yeah, well, and I was the lead in St. Charles, and back then mobile phones were kind of like really cool, so we could say, hey, there's a guy in Wentzville, there's a guy in Mid Rivers taking. And we would go with our flyers and approach people as he approached them and told them not to sign. Had the police called on me several times. But the cool thing is they'd run everybody off, not just me or not just so. But it was my experience with Jobs with Justice has been just really a great part of my life, because it's given me those exposure and knowing people that not only feel the way I do, but are willing to put in the work and to show up. So anyway, I appreciate you a lot, Teresa, and the group and everything else. And if you guys were ever considering it, it's a great organization to be part of. And I've done it all with them over the years. My comments.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I think you and I were actually in leadership training many years ago together, because
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was a kind of a, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. That was a long time ago, wasn't it?
It was because, again, I think Lucy, my oldest, who's now 10, I think she was a baby.
Yeah, I do remember that. I do remember that. That was probably 10, 12 years ago. Wow.
I have two questions. One is, we have this really heavily Republican legislature and government, but we don't have that many that I know of wealthy people. Why do people keep voting against their interest? And what does Jobs with Justice do to help educate people? And my second question is, you said that you get arrested. Where do the funds come from to help people who step up? It sounds like you are volunteering to get arrested, who do that, to help you with like your court costs and stuff.
Well, for the first question, it really depends who the organizing body is behind the civil disobedience. Again, for January 27th, we were doing a lot of planning of that. That was not spontaneous at all. Everyone who volunteered to be arrested, lawyers had to check to make sure they didn't have any outstanding warrants or outstanding court cases, because that could make things much more complicated for them legally. So, for example, my good friend Daryl, he's a leader in Expect Us, and he had other outstanding court cases. So we said, Daryl, you cannot get arrested today. So he was standing with us right until the moment when everyone who wasn't getting arrested cleared the street, and then those of us that were blocking traffic. In that case, SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, they are paying still for the attorneys that are representing us. We were all released right away, like within an hour of booking. So I don't think there wasn't any bail or anything. We were just processed all together at a police station and then let go. But in terms of the court costs or any fees, that's through SEIU for this particular action. I mean, the political stuff's a lot more complicated. That's something, sorry, I forgot to mention. So currently right now, we're developing platforms in St. Louis area, specifically for the city of St. Louis, Columbia, and Springfield, that we're calling people's platforms, that we're then asking all candidates to sign on to. And so even though we don't, and I think we're going to continue to do this more statewide, so even though we don't endorse candidates, we can say, these are the candidates that signed on to this platform with these values. And we're also right now having in districts across the state with legislators, both Democrats and Republicans. Because again, when you can show, for example, we had one meeting with a legislator in Springfield last year. We said, more people voted for Prop B in your district to raise the minimum wage than voted for you.
Huh.
Right? So maybe you want to support this issue. That's what we're also doing right now with Medicaid. Statewide, we're having in districts on Zoom with Democrat and Republican legislators saying, look, this is how many people voted for you in your district. This is how many people in your district voted for Medicaid expansion. Maybe you should do what your constituents want and not mess with this. So I think we are moving into more of what are called side-by-sides, where again, we'll have a platform or an issue and then ask candidates to sign on to it, so that even though, we're not technically endorsing a candidate, we're saying like, these are the candidates that have signed on to these values and the other ones have not. I mean, in terms of, again, the reason why it's so horrible that Amendment 3 passed is that, again, and why we must pay attention, and why anybody who's eligible who wants to join a redistricting committee should try to do it, is because how the districts are laid out in Missouri greatly impacts who gets elected, right? And who's voting. And we have to really pay attention to that and challenge that. But until we can loosen because this is what we've seen throughout the state. Again, until we can loosen the connection that many white voters in Missouri think, well, I may be poor, I may need Medicaid, but I'm going to vote against it, right? Because I'm still white, and that's more important to me than having a minimum wage where I can feed my family. That's more important to me than having access to health care. Like, until we can loosen those bonds and say working people in this state and people who aren't able to work, I mean, people in this state need health care. People in this state need a wage where they can support their families. And that goes across location and race and class. We just need those things. And until we can loosen those bonds, not a lot's going to change. And that's, I have these conversations with my in-laws all the time, right? My in-laws in Farmington and Springfield and Republic. It's a lot of tedious work.
One final question. You are a 501c3, is that correct?
Yeah. So, well, there's different things. So we have right now 3 entities. The main one is a 501c3. We also have the voter action, which is C4, which is the most flexible one to donate to. Excuse me. And then when we're running ballot initiatives, we also have a ballot fund, which is a PAC.
Yeah.
But the only one that's tax deductible is the 501c3. Again, the reason that we don't endorse candidates is because, take, for example, the mayor's race right now in the city of St. Louis, okay? Any one of those candidates has worked, all of them except one have worked with us, right? And can claim us as allies. In order to maintain the coalition, in order to continue working together across organizations and across regions, like we just don't get into that. But we are starting again to have much more of the platform and demanding that candidates sign on to platforms.
Well, thank you very much for presenting today. And I think I can speak for most of us online that we appreciate you lawbreakers. We knew Bill Otto, but yeah.
Morton had one more.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Sorry, Jeff, interrupt. I see a lot of times where there's these action items where you're out, protesting, marching, picketing, whatever. Is there a text message board we can get on to be alerted to those kind of things, those action items? Because a lot of times I see them after they're over with or as they're going on, and it's like, shoot, I didn't know I would have gone.
We are working on that. Unfortunately, the infrastructure to be able to text as many people as we, like the 15,000 people we have in our database, is pretty expensive right now. And so we have been able in certain campaign times to get that infrastructure from People's Action. We are trying to figure out how to get that like more consistently. Probably following the Facebook group, Missouri Jobs with Justice, is quicker. I mean, in terms of like any event that is on, because statewide events as well as local events that have that are coming up are on the Facebook page. We also have Twitter. We also have Instagram. We have a fabulous, relatively new comms director who was a leader in the Springfield leadership team and is now on staff in Springfield, who's really been upping our game. But yes, it is something that we want. It's just incredibly expensive infrastructure that we don't yet have the capacity for full time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming and presenting today. We really appreciate it, Dr.
You're
Danieley.
welcome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being with you.